Okay, great. Thanks for that. You guys can see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
So that was certainly a good intro. And as Sandy mentioned, this, today is just a part of maybe a small piece or a piece of an overall framework process. And as I understand it, today's meeting is focused on such questions as, should we as a group create an inventory of US Arctic observing networks? And to help foster this discussion, Allison Gaylord and I would like to provide some perspectives, lessons learned from development of the Arctic Research Mapping application and the Arctic Observing Viewer. So later we're going to get into questions such as these, with the main goal for this meeting, before digging into the weeds perhaps, I don't know, is brainstorming the rationale and scope of an effort if this group decides to go forward with an inventory. So RMAP and AOV share a collective vision or conceptual model for Arctic observing and Arctic science generally that spans a project data lifecycle, from project planning on the left to data discovery and access and reuse on the right. So RMAP on the left is for project planning primarily, and knowing where awards from NSF and other efforts or other agencies are concentrating their efforts. And for RMAP then, envision a point, a project location, which we define as a logistical base of operation. And then in the middle is AOV. That's a tool to help with collection site monitoring. And you could also think of that as network planning just as easily. And so each project location could have multiple monitoring sites, which we call data collection sites. And that could be instrument or wherever there's been repeat observations. So then each data collection site can have multiple data sets, and those are available through various catalogs and portals. The idea here is to have a hierarchical approach to scientific information for multiple purposes and multiple end users, and to reach those different audiences for their specific needs across a spectrum. So here, for example, is a screenshot from AOV for 1,900 sites linked to the Global Terrestrial Network for Permafrost, or GTNP. You can see all these sites on the map. If you click on one of those points, you'll get a pop-up window like you see here with various details relating to that project and that site. And then those details or fields within the AOV database are shown also in a table down below. So there's over 13,000 sites in AOV associated with various projects and funding agencies. And much of the project level information that you see here is actually from RMAP. And I wanted to highlight, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but one particular field that we have for AOV that's in the middle of the table, it's called initiative. So the closest thing to the idea of a network in AOV, a field, is initiative, a set of coordinated projects or a network of observing sites that share funding, information, infrastructure, or common goals. And so this is one of many relevant database fields in AOV. And then here's a list of initiatives currently in AOV. So in addition to GTMP, there's Interact and ISO and Rosalka. There's DBO and Calm and various others. We've been adding to AOV as we can. It's a rather laborious process, actually. But we have on our radar other potential, quote, initiatives that we could include in AOV. And so this is, in some ways, maybe sort of a list of other networks, Arctic observing networks. So moving forward, we should, if we're interested in creating an inventory of Arctic observing networks, US Arctic observing networks, we should be aware of and take advantage of existing inventories or resources. So RMAP and AOV, they're not really an inventory, but a resource that may be helpful. We're interested in helping. And then there's other tools such as the AOV Research Assets, which is an inventory of marine and coastal monitoring instruments and efforts, both planned and operational. And we'll get into each of these just a little bit more here in a moment. Of note is the North Slope Science Initiative catalog that has a subcatalog on monitoring studies on the North Slope and adjacent waters. SAON has the Committee on Observations and Networks, and they have recently, just late last year, created or released an inventory of Arctic observational programs and a separate inventory of Arctic observational networks. And then also on the EU side, that is EU PolarNet, which had a parallel inventory of existing monitoring as well as modeling programs. And then Intaros here is just ramping up, and they may create an inventory. We're not sure. It's more parallel perhaps to the idea of the US AON. This is probably not a complete list. And just to play devil's advocate a little bit here, is there something different we actually want or need to do? I think there probably is, but that's for the group to decide. And one thing to note here is that the existing inventories towards the bottom, well, SAON-CON and EU PolarNet, those are mainly European in scope, and so the US is not actually all that well represented there. So here's a screenshot of the AOV Research Assets tool, and it's a great tool for planning and assessment and coordination. Note some of the information fields here, such as status, start and end dates, the particular sensors for that asset. And if you click on one of those points, you get more information about the study. There's also a time slider and filters, and so this screenshot is showing the research and monitoring assets, which are primarily in the Beaufort and Chukchi and Bering Seas, with information from various agencies, academic institutions, as well as private industry. So then this is a screenshot of the North Slope Science Initiative catalog, looking at monitoring studies with 123 such studies. And within their database, they have details such as on the right, study variables, topics, subtopics, contact information, links to more information, etc. And that's for the North Slope and adjacent waters. This is a screenshot of the still in development SAON-CON inventory of observational networks. And so you can see this is high order information, with a smaller set of fields or information descriptions, and includes several networks. And note that there is a separate inventory, as I mentioned, of programs. And this is a useful resource for sure, and we're not all that well represented there yet. The inventory of programs is much bigger. And yeah, so, and then this is a spreadsheet that is the EU PolarNet inventory of Arctic as well as Antarctic monitoring programs. And it's pretty big. And so one thing to be aware of, I think, that comes out of this is that sometimes there's apples and oranges together. And moving forward, I think it'll be super important for this group to have anything be definition driven, where you carefully define network or versus initiatives versus programs versus projects, etc. And then here, there's another lesson to be learned perhaps from this coordinating effort going on now for for global data science. So this is the Research Data Alliance Mapping the Landscape interest group. And as I understand it, this is a coordinating body through RDA. And they initially wanted to create an inventory of data infrastructures and coordinating activities such as data portals, data catalogs, data centers, but also data coordinating initiatives. And the thing to know here is that after a little while, they realized, whoa, there's already a lot of other inventories already started of global data or even regional data centers or resources. And so what it turned out to be, or what they ended up shifting to, is creating an inventory of inventories. So that's something to keep in mind and for observing networks. And then also keep in mind maybe the idea of considering interoperability of information between inventories. And one of those resources that was listed there is this conceptual map or mind map that's led by Peter Pulsifer with an activity called Mapping the Arctic Data Ecosystem. So this is a different interface, a different way of presenting or working with the information, an inventory, if you will. And so obviously having a visual interface like this highlights the linkages, and this is interactive. It leads to more information if you click in various ways. So at this point then, before we start the discussion, I'm handing the mic over to Will to lead this now separate item in the agenda with some questions and more.